Welcome to Xagility. I'm your host, John Coleman.
Jim Benson, welcome again to the Xagility podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, John. Thank you for having me back.
I'm delighted to have you. You've written another book, The Collaboration Equation, Strong Professionals, Strong Teams, Strong Delivery. Wow, strong writing. Really loved it. Just came out the last few weeks. Really, really cool. And you wrote other books before. Actually, you wrote this book on your own. A book about collaboration you wrote on your own, but you collaborated with other people on personal Kanban.
The world runs on the engine of irony.
So, Jim, for those who don't know you that well, you were involved with personal Kanban. You invented lean coffee, as far as I understand. You're certainly the person who popularized it. And you are renowned now for obeya as well as a way of working and the system of humane management, where people don't just have a big wall, but they're not just thinking about the work, they're also thinking about how they work and how that goes together and so on. And you've got a lot of experience. This book, The Collaboration Equation, has lots of stories of your client work and other people as well who you've asked to be part of this. So I really, really enjoyed it. I found it very, very valuable. It's highly recommended. But Jim, how did you get here? How did you even get to this place where you got involved in personal Kanban and obeya and all this type of stuff?
People often ask, what did you study to get to here? And I'm like, well, psychology and urban planning, of course, and loud music. I've always enjoyed working with people, and I've always enjoyed learning and building things. So as a person growing up in the middle of Nebraska, I did what almost nobody else did, which was I was an angry punk rocker. I had an actual kind of career where we sold albums and had concerts worldwide in the 1980s before there was an internet. So we had to learn how to make things. We had to learn how to produce music. We had to learn how to ship. We had to learn how to, do all those things. And at some point, I figured out that probably wasn't going to be the best growth industry in the future for me. So I went back to school, learned urban planning, and then went off to build subways and freeways. And so kind of between now, to truncate the very long story, I've worked in engineering and government, world government, insurance, software development. Obviously owned my own software company for a while, which is when we invented Kanban and personal Kanban and all of that kind of stuff. Our software company started off as one of the first Agile companies, pre-press book of XP Explained, and became Agile. At that point, became very interested in how do things actually work. So also studied Lean, studied Deming, studied all of the ideas out there. And there are many, many, many ideas that are not in Agile about how to work together. But all of them had the same problem. And that's that they would tell you, you do these 4 or 5 things and everything will be fine. They kind of pat you on your head, give you a cup of coffee or the mug. I got my SAFE certification mug or whatever. And then they send you on your way thinking that that's going to help you. But what nobody takes the time to learn is, how do we actually work together to do stuff? Why don't we do this? So that's what the book is about. Everybody says you need a culture of continuous improvement or to inspect and adapt. But what they're really doing is either just doing like 2-week sprints, or they're doing A3, they're doing this, that. They're doing the things, but they're not actually building the culture. So this book has stories about working, like you said, in construction, with the World Bank, with major corporations, with tiny companies. Across the board, human beings work with each other to provide value. That's the collaboration equation. Individuals work in teams to create value. That's how I got here. I got here because I care about other people and I want them to not be in pain while they're at work. And the way to make that happen isn't to give them a hug, but it's to make sure that they can actually do their work.
Very true. And just about the book, Jim, are there any discounts available for this book?
Not for the book, unfortunately. You can go to the Collaboration Equation website or to Amazon and buy the book. Right now, Amazon, I think, has the book for like a 5% or 6% discount. And there's this beautiful hardbound version. There's a nice softbound version, and I can't hold up the Kindle version, but they're all there. Also, the ideas in the book or the conversations around not just learning how to collaborate and how to set better foundations for Agile and Lean, but also the actual collaborations themselves are what we do at Modus Institute, which is modusinstitute.com, and that's our online school. But mostly it's a big group of people who are puzzling out every day, how do you get people to work together and love each other and love what they build? And that there are some discount codes for.
Yeah,
Good
thank
deal.
you very much. Okay, good. So I was giggling a little bit as I was reading the book because you were involved in some massive construction projects, and you just said something like, so casually, a typical construction project in New York is around $1 billion. It's just $1 billion,
It's just $1 billion, yeah. So people are like, my Series A funding was $6 million. And you're like, that's nice, sweetie. Yeah, the numbers that they're playing with and the amount of time they have to spend that much money on something that can't be wrong and is rife with opportunities for failure. It's mind-boggling that in 3 years they can take $2.5 billion and build a skyscraper in the middle of Manhattan. If it was software, it'd be like, well, that's 1.0. We'll go back in later and add the windows, This is the MVP. There's no MVP for a building. There's just a P.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's an amazing project.
Yeah, lots of pressure, I'm sure. So the whole idea of a wall of work, I've seen it done badly, Jim. I've seen rooms where the values of the company were kind of left at the door as you walked into this room. They actually called it the war room rather than the obeya room.
Yep.
Someone would be in there and there'd be some kind of daily huddle and, why didn't you get that done? You said you have it done by Tuesday and it's not done. Like, so what's going on? It's like kind of like a blame game rather than how can we work together to kind of solve this? Have you seen that as well?
Oh, certainly. Certainly. And any system that human beings build or anything that human beings build can be weaponized. You can kill someone with a banana if you want. You might have to get creative, but you can do it. So I've been doing the collaboration thing for a long time, and I was part of something called the Collaboration Commons or Cooperation Commons at Stanford in the 90s and early 2000s. And I did that work with a friend of mine named Howard Reingold. And this is at the beginning of the internet, right? The very launch of Twitter, the very launch of Facebook. And Howard said, if we don't watch out, this is going to become the always on panopticon, is what he called it. And it's like, everyone's going to be watching you all the time. And that's exactly what's happened. So we were all out there going, we're going to make a community and it's going to be beautiful. And Howard's like, yeah, sure. So with obeyas or with these, war room or a room with all of the information in it, the information is universally useful as the social system that is built around using that information. If that room belongs to the chief jerk officer who's just in there to be a jerk, and then you come in and then they use that to beat you over the head with, then that room will work perfectly well like that. And there's no way to avoid that because there's a power distance issue there that is taking precedence over the value of the information. And I guess the follow-on question to that would be, how do you diffuse things like that? And when you are in a hostile situation, there's a reason why it says the battlefield destroys all of our plans. It's because the personalities of the people that you're trying to counteract drive the response to diffusing the negative aspects of those personalities, which is kind of a fancy way of saying jerks are jerks and they're all individually jerks, and you have to figure out your own strategies to de-jerkify them.
It sounds like you have to pick your battles as well, right?
You do. And so there's a concept in the book that I know you want to talk about in a little bit, so I won't talk about it too much here, but it's called humble hubris. part of the book, but it's hardly mentioned in the book. And so I'm actually writing the next book just about humble hubris. And in it, one of the things that we talk about is that if you are a change agent, you have to be strategic about the change that you bring and the methods that you use to bring it. Otherwise, the existing systems and people's natural resistance to change are going to crush you every time, which is another reason why collaboration intentionally is so important, because you can start to set rules for everybody else saying, we value it when we know what's going on. We value when we know that things are going off the rails. We value doing a good job more than making the schedule. We value the schedule very highly, and we need to do a good job. So we really need to know when things are going off the rails earlier, not we need to hide them, that type of thing.
Indeed. And it kind of reminds me of a situation where I was in a room in London a few years ago. I think there were 50 of us in the room. And there was a lady in there, and she said to us all, she was a leader, and she said, "We're all psychologically safe in this room." And I knew in that moment we weren't psychologically safe in that room. You've got the Premier League football in England, and you get this football manager's in trouble, and then the chairman of the club comes out and says, "I fully support my manager," and then the manager's going to get fired.
Yeah, we had that issue in Iraq. That's what we said to Iraq. We're going to come in, everybody's going to liberate us, and we're going to liberate them, and they're going to be really happy. It didn't work out that way. Change doesn't care what you like. Change hates you.
And it means as well that we have to be really professional about the change as well. A lot of agile people, for example, would say, okay, maybe we do need to be agile about becoming agile, but I think we also need some kind of professional approach as well to kind of look at what's going on, and even getting the organization ready for the whole idea of obeya. I mean, one of my clients that I had last year, one of the interventions was, let's have an obeya. And it's like, yeah, that's a great idea, but nothing happened. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
Wow. How do you deal with that kind of situation, Jim?
Well, first off, you have to make sure that what you're building is what the people you're building it for need. And so it's one thing for you to say all married couples should communicate better and have some way to communicate better that works for some married couples, and then say if everybody just did this, everything would be fine. It's like, well, yes, if everyone did this and everyone grew up exactly the same way and nobody was ever traumatized by anything and there were no immediate stressors in the house and blah, 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 then yeah, that might perfect worldly work. So at the beginning of all of these major construction projects at Turner Construction, we want to set initially what they call the right environment. So a lot of the book is about how do you build a right environment, which is an environment in which professionals can behave professionally. And no, Agile is not a right environment, and neither is Lean, and neither is RUP, and neither is Safe, and neither is Scrum, and neither is XP. Any of those things are stuff we can do, but the right environment is driven by, let's say, for example, you go into a project and everyone in that project has 35 years of experience. Your right environment is going to look different than if you go in with one person who has 35 years worth of experience and a whole bunch of people who have 3. If you go in and everyone has domain knowledge, it's going to look different than if they don't. Or if you're going in and, at the beginning of last year, I had 2 development teams. One was in Belarus and the other one was in Ukraine. And suddenly a few weeks later, my development team was at war with itself. No sprint planning is going to get you out of that. So we have to recognize that the human beings that we're working with have real human needs that are identifiable, manageable, and important. And they're just as important as our planning cycles or our retrospective cycles or anything else. And those will show up in the needs of those professionals. So you get together and you have them say things like, we want to be informed, damn it. It's like, okay, well, if you want to be informed, you better have information. Where's that information going to come from? Well, we'll set up all these Google Docs. So you're going to tell me every morning you're going to come in and search through 500 Google Docs, or Confluence to find out what's going on. Well, no, that doesn't sound like a good idea. Well, how about if we put stuff on walls? Walls are nice. Now, all of a sudden, you've taken their needs, you've taken a way to meet or display those needs, and then you set up agreements between them to say, okay, we all agree that we're going to inform each other, that we're going to blah, 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 and then you make sure that those visualizations do those things. Give the people what they want.
Indeed. And there's a lovely story in the book about curtain walling, which I'm hoping we'll get to later on. But before we get to there, there's some terminology that I'd like to get out of the way, if that's okay. So you make a distinction in the book, Jim, between manager and leader. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
We have leaders, we have servant leaders, we have managers, we have technical managers, we have program managers, we have product owners, we have scrum masters, we have lots and lots and lots of ways that we confusingly and illegitimately spread agency, focus, determination, and psychological safety around a company. And the way that we are trained to adhere to or to execute those roles is no one is. Therefore, everyone that's doing it is doing it in a different way. Product owners are a classic example. You go to 5 companies, you'll find 45 different ways to be a product owner. And so what happens then is that the people who don't have clarity over what to do defer to those people, whether it's appropriate or not. So you get a bunch of people who aren't trained to do what they now have authority to do, and they're doing it in an anti-collaborative or solo way. And that is what we call a leader. They're not leading anything. On the other hand, when somebody is on a team and they notice, hey, we're about to code these 5 modules, and I just read over here that there's a cool way that we can do that work. And then they bring that new method to the team and say, why don't we give this a shot? That is leadership. And we will say that, hey, you exhibited good leadership, but we won't call that person a leader because they don't have the pay grade to call them a leader. So the pay grade people are managers by and large. They're responsible for making sure that things get done, whatever those things might be. Leaders are those other folks that say, right now, there is a way that we can work better, de-stress, get work out faster, get work out with more quality. And I have, again, we'll use that term again, that humble hubris. I'm going to bring that to the group, and we are going to work together on it. And we're going to learn, and we're going to become better at the end. That is what leadership is. Leadership is on the battlefield, making sure that your people are safe and that they're getting their work done. So that's kind of the distinction for me. As manager is in charge of like workflow and having the variety of information they might need to report up the chain. But the people doing the work, they are the people that actually exhibit, anyone in the company actually can exhibit leadership at any time. And if we don't make that distinction, then we never have psychological safety.
Yeah. And actually, you mentioned as well in the book the topic of brittle management styles, which is probably reinforcing that anti-collaborative. Can you elaborate more on that, Jim, about brittle management versus resilient management styles? Yes,
and we see this play out on the international stage all the time now. So a few years ago, not too long ago, the world had lots and lots of different treaties, trade agreements, other types of agreements. And we were a lot less stressed then. The global inflation rate was a lot less then. So we had a resilient set of management styles there where there was a lot of different decision makers making a lot of different decisions, and there was a structure to make those decisions or structures to make those decisions. Then we gradually, or not so gradually, shifted to kind of our present system, which is there's a lot of single individuals, strong leaders, if you will, making decisions, which means that we have now created information bottlenecks, decision-making bottlenecks, action bottlenecks, and endless piles of overhead as we argue about the efficacy of those single decisions that no longer have a structure around them to be made. And that is how almost every company in the world operates. We set up managers where we consolidate decision-making authority into that manager. And then that means that decisions are made more slowly. They're made with less thought. They're made with less perspectives. And that becomes highly brittle. Then when those brittle systems break down, everyone blames everybody else because we never bothered to define in the first place not only what a successful outcome was, but an agreement about how we actually arrive at a successful outcome.
Indeed. You also mentioned in the book that leadership forms and is formed by structure. So when you're talking about structure there, what kind of structure were you talking about?
So if I run into a room full of people who have no pre-existing reason to listen to me, and I start yelling at them that they should do things, that is being a jerk. It is often how people are promoted, which is why we end up with toxic work environments, because the people who are the meanest to other people or push their weight around are the ones that end up being confused with leaders. And it's because other people didn't have the psychological safety or the structure to be able to help. So imagine, if you will, we have a construction project, and before we start the project, we agree with each other. If anything ever looks like it's going wrong, we are going to not raise the red flag when we're sure of it. We're going to raise the red flag when we first sense it. We are going to have various visualizations in our obeya or our war room or whatever we want to call it. We're going to be able to see everything that's happening in the project as it's happening. Who's doing what, who's overloaded, who's having a hard time with stakeholders, blah, 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 blah. All of those things are going to be fully visible. And we are all going to watch what everybody else does. So if you're on a project like that, where there's maybe, we'll just say 10 different disciplines working on the building, and right now you're digging the foundation, so you're not doing a whole lot of woodworking. But if you are the woodworking superintendent, you better be paying attention to what's happening in the foundations, because the problems that they're having there are going to likely bubble up to impact you, either because of the design decisions that they make or because you'll have identical problems to the ones that they have. And if anybody's ever paid attention to a large project that they've had, software or otherwise, you will recognize that there's a family of crap that starts at the beginning of the project that no one ever gets rid of because they're not in the business of solving the problems. So we set that group up initially to say, we are going to be problem solvers. We are going to learn together, and we are going to build the best thing possible.
Yeah. Would that be including the executive leaders, Jim?
If we take that everyone is a leader or has the opportunity to lead, and we take for granted that there are managers who have different focuses than the rest of the group, so their leadership is going to look different, but it's not going to be more important. And it's not sacrosanct. You know, if those leaders, those manager folks, if they make a bad decision, it's everyone else's job as professionals to note, hey, wait, let's get together and talk this out. Not you're a jerk, or I hate your decision, or I can't change that anyway, but let's go back into the obeya, let's sit down and let's workshop this, because there's some other perspectives here that we should probably bring to bear. And that is structure. So structure doesn't have to be everything has to fit into a 2-week iteration, or everything has to flow from left to right on this Kanban board, or everything has to be between 1 and 22 million story points or whatever. But the structure is, as human beings working on this project, do we expect professional behavior from the rest of us? And have we defined what that professional behavior is? And that professional behavior might be, if something's bothering you, have a lean coffee about it. If you see that someone else is buried, you help them. Because you're going to be buried later and they're going to need to help you. And if you don't help them, all sorts of opportunities have been missed.
I never thought about using a lean coffee for what's bothering you. That's probably a brilliant way of using it. Never thought of it. I often use it for when you're trying to democratically decide what we're going to talk about in this session. Never thought about it using it that way. That's actually genius. Thank you for that inspiration. Yeah. You told a story as well in the book about curtain walling. My brother-in-law, Ger McNamee, he's a curtain waller. And in Ireland, I believe it's still not a trade, but in the UK, it is a trade. And so for the layperson, curtain walling, as far as I understand, is where you put on the lovely, beautiful skin on the building with this metal and glass and make it all look beautiful, because you got the basic concrete. And, it's basically an elevator shaft, a very expensive elevator shaft surrounded by some floors. And then they put the curtain wall on to kind of dress it up. But there was a problem, I believe, in one of the projects in the book. And there was a character in the book, and there was a manager there, and he was like somebody's boss's 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 boss, something like that.
Yes.
So this poor guy, whoever he was, had to figure out what was going on, because when they were putting up the curtain walling, basically there were scratches on the surface, lots of scratches. Mm-hmm. And they were trying to figure out what was going on. Can you take us through that story, Jim, and how you used obeya and A3 and various other techniques to figure out what was going on there?
So the first thing to note about curtain wall is as close to software development as construction gets. No one has any idea what they're doing when they start putting up curtain wall, because it's always unique. Now, you could have a set of buildings where you've made curtain wall. It's going to go through all those buildings, but the types of anchoring, the materials used in the curtain walls, the way the curtain walls respond to changes in weather patterns, all of those things are usually unique, because the skin of the building is the statement that the architect is making. And so the outside of the building always has weird stuff. And this particular building had a fairly tame curtain wall, but what was happening was the first through the 6th floors of this building was a 44-story building in Manhattan that they were reskinning. When they would pull them up, as you said, they had scratches, dents, and other abrasions on them, which meant that after the thing was all put together, then someone would have to come through, buff them out, repaint them, and maybe put Bondo in or whatever to make them look better. And if you would have done that up the 40 floors, it would have been millions and millions of dollars of unnecessary work. So Charlie Whitney, who is a vice president at Turner Construction, went to this site, 1271 Hudson in New York, and grabbed a level 1, which is their entry-level people, guy named Randy Castillo. And he's like, I want you to solve this problem. So the power distance between these people was massive. It was absolutely massive. And it was a company, Turner is a very, very wonderful family-like company, but there is a definite hierarchy there. And it was intense. So the first couple times we got together with Randy, couple times I got together with them, because they were doing this, without me, Randy was like, yes, Mr. Whitney. Yes, Mr. Whitney. But what Charlie did was he gave Randy a format from Lean called an A3, which is a problem-solving piece of paper, basically, where you identify what the problem is, your background, how you want to solve it, how the solution's going, and then what the results were at the end. And just Google it. Agile could use with a lot more A3 thinking. But he didn't say, hello, I am your lean sensei, and I am here to impart the lean upon thee. do thy A3 and all shall be well. He didn't. He said, Randy, take this piece of paper and this pen and go out and watch what the curtain wall installers are doing and see what happens. So Randy goes out and meet with him later. And Randy says, well, what happened is they looked at me very suspiciously and tried to like put their bodies between me and whatever they were doing. They were protective because they didn't want to get in trouble because they knew that the curtain walls had been all scratched up, and they thought, oh, here comes the general contractor that's going to blame us and, you know, ding our bosses and whatever. Then Randy goes out and starts talking to them. And he's like, look, you guys, if we don't fix this, you're going to have to incur all this cost going up the building. And so we just want to figure out what's going on. And then you get the second phase of being a change agent, which is when people are like, I don't trust you, but you just said that you're here to help. So here goes. And then they proceeded to dump every complaint about Turner, about construction, about curtain wall, about the weather, about the city of New York, about hot dogs, whatever you wanted. They dumped every complaint that they ever had with Randy, and Randy's A3 became smashed full of type. And over time, when they finally figured out that Randy was there to help them, they started collaborating on the solution. And what they found was that almost every assumption that both the installers and Turner had about the causes of those abrasions were wrong. But all of those assumptions that they had were highly plausible stories. Mm-hmm. So a traditional leader would have come in and said, damn it, you guys are just banging that thing as you're bringing it up the building. Stop doing that. Then they would leave and the problem wouldn't go away, right? And then they might come back later and say, solve it yourself. And then they do whatever they thought was the problem and the problem wouldn't go away. But Randy went through this step-by-step process of actually observing the work, what Lean calls going to the Gemba, which every software team should do with the people who use their software. The UX team shouldn't do that. Your product owner shouldn't do that. You should do that regardless of who they are. And to let you know how fanatical I am about this, I worked with the Department of Social and Health Services for the state of Washington, setting up systems with them. And I made their developers who built systems to help caseworkers for child protective services and for the equivalent for people who help like at-risk adults. I made them go out in cars with caseworkers and smell what it was like, not just experience, but smell what it's like to go out and go to some of these places where people are habitually treating each other poorly. There is no excuse for us not to touch our work, to go to the Gemba and learn about the people intimately that are using our products. And if we don't, we're always going to be inflicting our products on other people. So Randy was learning firsthand, sometimes in a friendly environment and sometimes not, how to talk directly to the people actually doing the work. And when he was done, this is the brilliant thing about this, when he was done, he wasn't that scared kid anymore. He spoke with authority. He went around Turner and said, here's what I did, showed everybody else all of his work. And he, you know, it wasn't like he did this for 6 years. It was like he did this for like 8 weeks, maybe 6. Mm. The amount of growth in that guy was awe-inspiring. And so the problem is that it was always there. He was always that guy, but power distance and structure had made him not have the psychological safety that he wanted. When Charlie Whitney came in, he didn't give him an A3 and teach him problem solving. What he did was he gave him structure to be a leader. Mm. And that's awesome. That's so awesome. I can't even stand it. That's so awesome.
It's a lovely story. And it reminds me of a sentence at the end of your book, which really, really caught me. It says, in an anti-collaborative environment where leadership is not a verb, but a position, we in turn are not verbs. traditional management's centralized control turns us into categories, nouns, and things, we're not evolving, not even integral even to our companies. In lean parlance, in traditional companies, people are waste. This is why leadership lays people off at the first sign of trouble rather than engaging the entire company to get out of trouble. I thought that was really powerful, because I talk about one of the highest levels of agility, and there's no infinite. It's like agility is infinite, isn't it? But if there was a high level of agility, it's about having leaders at all levels without leader being in a position, which is kind of what you talk about as well, isn't it? And it's also about, in that situation, in that story, the character who was involved there, who went out with his notepad, he had the environment where he could actually do his work. He was still dealing with people who didn't trust him, but he was confident enough to go about it. I think you talk about agency, and maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about that, because for collaboration to really work, you could have people who have what you often call learned helplessness, where they've tried loads of things many times and it didn't make any difference, so they end up kind of going back into their shell. How do we create that environment where people, they feel like they have agency, at least, where they can actually do these things and develop like that over a number of weeks?
The word feel is a word that we should rapidly become highly aware of and perhaps allergic to. So we say, people want to feel heard. No, they damn well do not. They want to be heard, and they want their words to have actions or repercussions. So we see all the time bullshit leadership where people show up and they say, all right, I'm here. I want you to be heard. And then people go, ah, and then they say, yeah, I feel your pain. And then they leave and they go golf or whatever, and nothing happens. And then people are like, well, now I feel ignored, but I don't feel heard. When Buckminster Fuller said 70 years ago or so, I seem to be a verb, he was saying, I as a human being have impact on the planet around me. And I want to see that impact. I want to understand that that impact has happened. And people get learned helplessness, which is the state of not acting because people have slapped you down for doing so. They achieve that state by trying to be a verb and running into a stronger verb, the antithesis of whatever their verb is. They're like, I'm action, and then they get crushed by the giant verb of inaction. We want desperately to build systems where human beings are not just told that they can act. I can't count for you the number of stupid moron people of power who nonchalantly tell people with no power that they should raise themselves up by their bootstraps or that they should act when they do not have the structures available to act. Now, the flip side of that is a post that I did on the social media world on LinkedIn the other day, where I did this exercise with a bunch of people who worked in a bank in Australia, and I had them list everything that the company did that stopped them from acting or collaborating. And they filled all these walls and windows with sticky notes. And then I said, all right, now I want you to take off of the wall all of the sticky notes that you can't do anything about. So they all go up and they start taking sticky notes off the boards, and then they all start slowing down. And then they look in their hands, and then they start putting the sticky notes back up. Because they realize that there is something that they can do about it. They're not as helpless as they think they are, but there's no system to promote responsible professional behavior. Agency is not me just being able to, or psychological safety, both of them are not me just being able to complain when I think there's time to complain. It's me being able to act when my action is required. And if you can't act and you know that your action is required, that it would be helpful for you to act, and you can't act, that is a neutering offense. Your ability to act regardless of gender, has been taken away from you. And you are now impotent. Straight up. And once we do that, we start to wait for other people to act. And when we do that enough times, we do that as a matter of habit, and we don't even act on the things that we know we could act on. So when they started putting those sticky notes back up, they started to realize, oh crap, I've got more agency than I give myself credit for. And if you start taking that agency, that's your beachhead to start whittling down the negative, anti-collaborative positional power that's there now. And this isn't saying that managers are bad. I don't want to turn this into class warfare, because businesses can't operate without managers. But the managers are suffering just as much as everybody else, because they have unachievable KPIs they're trying to meet, and they have zero training and zero knowledge of how to make those KPIs happen or to push back against them. They don't have the data, they don't have the training, they don't have the narrative to do that. So everyone, if you're on a team, your manager is a team member. And if you don't treat them that way, that's not a leader. It's not a servant leader. It's basically the victim that's going to victimize you. You're building that victimization system. End of sermon.
I love that sermon. To talk about mindset, I think mindset's important, but the problem with it is it's not observable. So I do get the idea that we need to think differently, but I can't observe that people are thinking differently. So,
but you can.
You think, yeah?
Yeah. This is why we run into problems with the word culture.
Yeah.
Because we feel that culture is mindset. Culture is just like how much I love you. No, culture is the sum total of the mechanisms we have to protect ourselves as professionals, to ensure that our professionalism is expressed. So are we able to learn? Are we able to improve? Are we able to get the project done? So what happens is we build systems now that are super rigid and anti-collaborative and centralized, and then you build the subsystem, which works around that system. Right?
Yeah.
All of our workarounds, all of our subterfuge, which we do because we're professionals and we want to get the work done. If you give this to Marcello in order to make a decision, you're never going to get the decision. So to do these 5 things and work around him so that you don't have to worry about that. That's because we haven't taken the time to build an observable culture.
Yeah.
So your obeya, if you build your boards right, they have to demonstrate what your culture is. If the boards are up there and the boards are making you move tickets too fast, like a Kanban's up there and it's making you move tickets faster and everybody's burning out, that is antithetical to the culture, and the board is broken. If the board tells you we're moving tickets too fast and everybody's going to burn out, that board works. That's a real board. And if I know that that board is there and it's going to stop me from running out of gas, it's going to stop me from, going home and being cranky with my family, then that board works. So if you set up the right environment up front, you say, these are the values that we are going to adhere to. Then you come up with rules about how to adhere to those values, not rigid rules, enough structure to make sure that they happen. And then you watch your boards and you say, are we miserable today? Yes. Well, something's wrong then.
I like that. That's really cool. You're using the obeya to make the culture observable in whatever way we can. Maybe we can observe behaviors as well, but you can definitely observe stickers on the wall and what's happening and what discussions are going on around those.
You can observe the systems and its impacts on the people in the system. And then you can use that to maintain your culture, which helps the people. And if you notice that everybody's miserable and the boards are working fine, then you get together again and you say, why are we miserable? And how can we visualize that to make that go away? Because that misery is the major bottleneck of software development teams. It's not even dependencies. It's just how much we're destroying our lives in order to allow people to crush some candy.
Yeah, indeed. Jim Benson, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Where do people find out more about your material at the Modus Institute. You have some e-learning platform. You have some courses as well. Where do they go to find out more about this?
modusinstitute.com. Modus is MODUS, Institute. We have classes there for individuals, for teams, and for value. We're trying to cover all of the bases. And there's a blog there, the Collaborwalkie podcast, which sometimes has guests and sometimes just has conversation. And we have about 500 or 600 people running around in there right now. And the conversations in there are so deep. They're so meaningful. And the highest point of that is we have a lean, agile visual management certification. Our accreditation cohort 3 is going to start at the beginning of February. But in there, we talk about these things in depth with a small group of global folks. So if you're really into this and you really want to go deep, this isn't a 2-day class. This is ongoing conversations about all the things that I've just set up until now. And the people that come are so awesome, so special, so wonderful. I love them to death.
Yeah, so there's e-learning, there's workshops, there's certifications, there's a community. How does somebody join this community?
Yeah, it's an annual subscription. If you pop on, so there's a coupon code that's underneath this video, right down there. And you can pop in there. You can also pop in there and use our chat feature and talk to Dave, our salesperson, if you'd like personal Kanban courses or problem-solving courses or prioritization courses for your teams. If you have teams, we have guided tours. We have a brilliant faculty, 5 people on our faculty who, wow, it's brilliant. It's just wonderful being around people that you respect so much every day.
And for the people on podcasts, it's in the podcast description as well. So it's on YouTube and on your favorite platform. Jim Benson, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. You're fun as always and full of wisdom. And you've been doing this. This is not just a lecture. The book is just full of stories and I really enjoyed it. Very digestible, easy to read. I really, really enjoyed it. And best of luck with the book and with everything going on at Modus Institute, Jim.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.